vaccine. For example, if the approved vaccine is available only in limited quantity, then it may not be considered adequate to address the public health emergency. Second of all, if the vaccine that is approved for use only in a limited population, then that vaccine may not be considered adequate to address the needs of the public health emergency for other populations.
Thank you.
Mr. Tubman.
Yes. First of all, thank you and the other members of wonderful job. I think the whole country owes you a gratitude for all.
You speak a little louder, please. We're having problems hearing.
Sorry. Just thanking Dr. Fick and everybody at the FDA for all the work you've
done. Right.
Independently reviewing the data. Thank you. Two questions. One is, you indicated that since the submission came in from Pfizer, you've had a lot of ongoing discussions. And the first question is, does that include getting updated data? Because the closing date for the data that's in their submission is November 14th, which is 26 days ago, which is almost a month, about half of the entire period for the 2 months minimum required for EUA. So have you gotten more recent, requested and gotten more recent data? And the second question is a follow-up to Dr. Perla. The question, you've given us only one question, and that is yes or no to recommending approval for the entire amount, which is population, which Pfizer is requesting, which is the entire 16 and over. But certainly the committee could view this as something they'd like to grant EUA for, but given the balancing of risk and benefit, it may be different for different populations. So we might want to grant it or recommend it for a smaller set than Pfizer's asking for. But your question doesn't seem to allow for that. And I was wondering if you have a backup question that might be used. I know that in the past with the dengue review, there's backup questions. So just want to ask if you can answer this.
Okay. Could I say that your last question, we can bring that up during the discussion later on. So I'm going to excuse Dr. Fink from having to answer that part of the question.
Thank you.
So
to answer your first question, no, we have not received additional data sets beyond the data sets that were submitted to us comprising a cutoff date of November 14th. As you can imagine, there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into preparing a data set for submission. And so it really is infeasible for the sponsor and for FDA to be chasing our tails trying to get data sets that encompass more and more data as time goes on. That being said, if the sponsor becomes aware of, or if we become aware of any data that would potentially impact our benefit risk assessment, we do have discussions with the sponsor regarding those data.
And we will be able, Mr. Taubman, to ask questions of the sponsor after their presentation later on. So we can revisit this issue. Next, Dr. Perlman.
Yes. So I just had a question about the last part of what you were talking about when you talked about how Pfizer is going to deal with the issue of placebos going off the vaccine trial, and you asked for advice from the committee. Is that part of the EUA vote, or is that a second issue?
So that is not a question for a vote. It is just an item for discussion. We'd like to hear the committee's thoughts on the plan that is being proposed by Pfizer, which you will hear about in greater detail later today.
Dr. McGinnis.
Question that's sort of a follow-up from what Mike Carilla originally started. Given that this is considered an investigational product under an EUA, I'm assuming that any manufacturer cannot actually market such an investigational vaccine. Is that correct?
So this is the emergency use authorization does not allow for commercial distribution of the vaccine via the usual marketing that would be available to a licensed vaccine. So I hope that clarifies things. If anyone else from FDA wants to chime in, I'd welcome additional remarks.
So Doran, thank you. I'm happy to get the comments. I'm just trying to understand. So it's not marketed traditionally, but compensation for an investigational vaccine is possible under an EUA, like with a government entity?
So again, this is not my area of expertise.
I understand.
The emergency use authorization may include conditions related to advertising and other similar issues in terms of transfer of money between vaccine recipients and providers, or between the U.S. government and the manufacturer. I can't speak to those.
Dr. Meisner.
Thank you, Dr. Monto. And I would like to thank Dr. Marks, Dr. Fink, and Dr. Gerber and everyone else at the FDA, because the amount of work that you have done is just extraordinary. And the briefing packets that have been circulated are clear and extremely helpful. So thank you very much for your ongoing work. The question I have for you is, it will be advantageous for a number of reasons to have one of the COVID-19 vaccines available under a biologic license application instead of an EUA. And can you, and I realize it's a difficult question, but can you offer any comments about the route or the pathway forward for the FDA to begin to think about when you've reached a point that you would consider a BLA?
Yes. So first of all, we do want any vaccine that is made available under an EUA to continue its testing to allow for its licensure as soon as possible after issuance of the EUA. So this continued evaluation, as I explained in my presentation, I think first and foremost would include some longer-term follow-up of participants enrolled in ongoing studies, as well as safety and effectiveness data coming out of use of the vaccine under the EUA. This additional evaluation would then meet our usual expectations for clinical data to be included in a licensure application. There are some other sources of information that involve manufacturing and facilities and potentially non-clinical studies as well that we would typically require to support a licensure application, but are not absolutely necessary to support issuance of an EUA.
Is it possible to predict or estimate when conditions of safety and efficacy might be satisfied for BLA?
In terms of the time it would take, yeah, I couldn't predict, but I will say that we typically ask for at least 6 months of follow-up in a substantial number of clinical trial participants to constitute a safety database that would support licensure.
Thank you.
And finally, Dr. Fuller.
Overview. My question, did I understand you to say that the FDA in the October 22nd meeting looked at the manufacturing quality of the Pfizer vaccine and that was satisfactory? And if so, how will that be evaluated in the actual distribution of the vaccine? And will we talk about that later?
Right. So to clarify what I said earlier, as part of the EUA submission and in information submitted prior to the EUA, FDA has been conducting an ongoing review of manufacturing quality, consistency, and control. And we have found this information to be adequate to support emergency use authorization of the vaccine. We are not intending to discuss details of the manufacturing process, many of which are proprietary, during today's meeting. But as Dr. Gruber and I discussed in response to a previous question, our review of the manufacturing information is an ongoing process and will continue even after the vaccine is authorized, if that is the decision that we make.
Okay, thank you.
You kicked us off with a lot of information, which we're going to be coming back to later on this afternoon. I'd like next to call on Dr. Aaron Hall from CDC, who's the co-lead in the epidemiology task force.